For over a century, the phantom haunting the streets of Victorian London has remained the most notorious unsolved mystery in criminal history. We know the name he was given, but we have never known the man. Focusing on the killer's identity obscures the material reality of 1888. Physical and scientific limitations made an arrest a mechanical impossibility. We often picture a brilliant, untouchable mastermind actively outsmarting the authorities. The truth is much colder. What happened in London was the catastrophic failure of a legal and investigative system operating entirely in the dark. The man who terrorized these streets was a ruthless opportunist who struck precisely when modern policing was still in its infancy, completely unequipped to stop him. To understand this failure, you have to look at the ground where the crimes took place. Whitechapel was a deliberately designed dumping ground for the poorest, most desperate citizens of the British Empire. For thousands of women living in this district, survival meant making a brutal daily choice between buying a 4-penny bed or buying a meal. To bridge the gap, many relied on occasional sex work to make it through the night. By the late summer of 1888, the grim reality of East End poverty was shattered by a sudden, escalating wave of violence targeting these women. Investigators were caught completely off guard. They were hunting a repetitive murderer decades before behavioral science developed profiling, or even coined the term serial killer. The authorities were being forced to invent the protocols of a modern homicide investigation in real time, with an aggressive press watching their every misstep. When Marianne Nichols and Annie Chapman were discovered, the horrific physical evidence, deep lacerations and extensive anatomical mutilation, demanded a scientific response. Yet the science simply was not there. Fingerprint analysis wouldn't enter British policing for another decade. Blood typing and trace evidence protocols did not exist. Detectives had no way to connect the physical ruin of the bodies to the killer's hands. The environment itself shielded the killer. The streets were navigated by rhythmic police foot patrols and illuminated only by dim, flickering gas lamps, making crime scenes practically impossible to secure or analyze. While the police struggled with the shadows, the press seized control of the narrative. Newspapers printed headlines like "Ghastly Murder in the East End," stoking panic and directing public fury toward invented caricatures like the so-called leather apron. Stripped of scientific anchors, investigators had to rely entirely on terrified eyewitnesses attempting to recall fleeting faces in the dark. This created a permanent forensic void where hard evidence should have been. The situation rapidly deteriorated on the last night of September. In the span of less than an hour, the killer murdered Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, demonstrating a terrifying escalation in speed and audacity. This map shows how these two strikes crossed a critical boundary. The murders occurred in two different jurisdictions, the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police, sparking immediate territorial friction between rival forces. That same night, officers discovered a piece of a victim's blood-stained apron beneath a chalked message on a wall. Fearing a riot, a senior officer ordered the writing washed away before it could be photographed, erasing the only direct evidence. The vacuum of hard evidence was quickly filled by a flood of chaotic misinformation. Hundreds of hoax letters poured into police stations and newsrooms, including one highly publicized taunt that officially signed off with the name Jack the Ripper. The investigation was drowning. Detectives were paralyzed by a lack. Scotland Yard was left with a massive list of suspects, a paralyzed institution, and zero conclusive proof. In the decades since, historians have debated dozens of candidates. From local asylum inmates to wealthy quack doctors, theories are built entirely on circumstantial timing and neighborhood rumors. Pop culture frequently entertains elaborate myths of royal conspiracies or elite surgeons covering their tracks. However, the erratic, frenzied nature of the violence points directly to a disorganized opportunist rather than a calculated aristocratic plot. Statistically, the most probable explanation is the simplest. The killer was likely an unremarkable local man who blended into the poverty of the East End, slipping easily through the cracks of a primitive legal system. Because the authorities of 1888 lacked the forensic anchors required to tie a specific person to a specific act, anyone could theoretically be a suspect. And because of that same void, No one can ever be definitively proven guilty today. The permanently open status of the file has sustained a massive, highly lucrative true crime industry. The mystery has outlived the victims, the detectives, and the era itself. This obsession is rooted in a psychological defense mechanism. We have a deep need to put a neat, defined face on the chaos of senseless violence, to draw a clear boundary around a monster. Elevating this criminal to a mythical supervillain serves a darker purpose. It provides a convenient distraction from the larger, systemic failure of Victorian society to protect its most vulnerable citizens. The 1888 investigation left behind a dangerous, enduring myth, a narrative built almost entirely on missing data. Modern historical consensus is finally turning away from the endless parade of suspects and the obsession with the killer's shadow. For over a century, sensationalist storytelling reduced 5 living, breathing women into mere props, treating them as footnotes in a monster's biography. The final, undeniable truth of the investigation is stark. The man who committed these crimes remains a ghost, but the humanity of the women he targeted is an absolute historical fact. We will likely never know his name, but we do know theirs. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly.